Legislation allowing Germany to make huge new investments in the military and infrastructure has cleared its last major hurdle. The upper house of parliament approved the measure by the necessary two-thirds majority. Germany has tight legal restrictions on government borrowing, which for decades has prevented significant new investment in defense. Well, the start of President Trump's second term in the White House has brought about a rapid change of outlook across Europe due to doubts about his commitments to NATO. In Germany, this has meant changing the constitution to exempt defense and infrastructure spending from the borrowing restrictions. Germany's media has described the measure that's now been approved as a giant funding bazooka, which could pave the way for €1 trillion of spending.
Diese Entscheidung heute, die wir heute zur Verteidigungsbereitschaft im umfassenden Sinne.
The decision we are taking today on defense readiness in a comprehensive sense for our country can therefore be nothing less than the first major step towards a new European defense community. A defense community that also includes countries that are not members of the European Union, but which are very interested in building this common European defense together with us, such as countries like Great Britain and Norway. Now we have to rebuild our defense capabilities from scratch. With a technology-driven defense and procurement strategy, with automated systems, with independent European satellite surveillance, with armed drones and with many modern defense systems and, above all, with reliable and predictable orders that should go to European manufacturers whenever possible.
We are securing the future for this country. Applause. Russia is by far the greatest threat to European security. Putin continues to act with undiminished severity against Ukraine and its civilian population, even after the offers for ceasefire negotiations and others.
Well, for his assessment of all these developments, I'm joined now on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Laskiewicz. Let's start with Heathrow, Europe's busiest airport. Why did such a vital part of Britain's and the world's transport infrastructure get knocked out by one fire at one power station 4 miles away?
Indeed, the key question is why. There's no answer, there's no resilience, as you rightly said in your previous statement, and hopefully they will look into this and in future not taken out by one fire. At the very least, there should be a backup of some sort in Heathrow, which will enable them to carry on going. The point is that not only the fire, but subsequently things have to be mended, and the implication is that as things stand, Heathrow could be closed for some time, which is, of course, ridiculous. So let us hope that they can get their act together and quickly make Heathrow run as it was before. And moreover, there should, of course, be a study about the resilience of all Britain's airports, that they do not go under just because of a local fire.
So, I mean, as you know, there's been lots of strong criticism about what happened and why. So in your assessment, that criticism is justified?
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with every word stated. In fact, I would go further. In view of the fact that the international situation is uncertain, to put it euphemistically, it can't be the case that a major airport is so open to security problems as well, because obviously it follows that we hope the fire was only natural, but it has already been stated in Poland and Lithuania that some fires there were in fact the work of the Russians, and it's quite clear that if there's no resilience in Great Britain, the same threat also is posed, not just through accident, but deliberate fires, and so this must be addressed as soon as possible.
Well, let's talk about that threat a little bit more, because you mentioned security there, and one of the big questions is how and why, or how the fire started. And I understand that counter-terrorism police are involved in London.
Yes, quite rightly. The police are keeping an open mind, and it's quite right to involve also the counter-terrorist police because of the incidents in Poland and Lithuania. But at present, there is no information, and it would be premature to make any judgment.
And of course, the question that will most certainly be on the minds of many despondent people who are stuck at the airport is when exactly is the airport going to reopen? I mean, there was talk of it opening later tonight, but that appears to have been kicked down the road.
I think they will open it at least partially soon. I don't believe that Heathrow will be closed for a long time. There are, after all, generators, emergency generators. They can ship in power from other sources. I imagine that tomorrow they'll be opening, and the problem is rather the knock-on effects, and therefore how long it will be before Heathrow is running normally, and this indeed may take some time.
Well, let's turn to the war in Ukraine, Dr. Laskiewicz, and the volume has been turned up again as negotiations continue to end the fighting. The Ukrainians are said to have been pushed out of most of the Russian territory of Kursk. What's the latest that you're hearing?
As far as I know, they've been almost pushed entirely out of it. The fact is that the Ukrainians, though, did succeed in at least saving all their men, or almost all of them. The equipment is unfortunately another story, but at very least they managed to do that. And so the effect hasn't been muted in the sense the Russians cannot carry on and easily launch a counter-offensive in that area. That's the good news. The bad news is that the Kursk enclave, or incursion area, if you like, has gone, and this is in itself a double whammy for the Ukrainians, because not only have they been defeated, but this was supposed to be a war winner, or at least a negotiation chip or something, and now it's simply gone.
And there are also reports of a new phase of Russian repression. To quote the Ukrainians, they say that President Putin has signed an order forcing people living on territory captured by Russia to become Russian or face arrest, prosecution and deportation. What do you make of that?
Yeah, the word repression is somewhat strong. Unquestionably, most countries, including Ukraine, want their citizens to be registered as Ukrainian. In fact, Ukraine itself, there have been Russians, when they were living under Ukrainian rule, had their names changed to more Ukrainian ones. So the notion that Ukrainians now under Russian control will have to do it is simply more of the same, if you will. What is interesting is not what he stated there, but something else altogether. It implies that Russia is almost certain it will remain in control of these territories. Please note that is the key point. And this in turn supports the notion that in these negotiations which are taking place, I suspect above Ukraine's head, between Trump and Russia, Trump has already made it quite clear that these territories, all of them it would appear, but at very least some of them, will now be deemed to be Russian and accepted as Russian. That is the key point.
Meanwhile, EU leaders have backed plans to ramp up Europe's defense spending driven by a mortal fear of Russia. I mean, they're facilitating hundreds of billions of euros in extra defense spending, and it's led by Germany, which has approved a measure to make huge new investments in the military. Tell us more.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, but there are 3 points to make. First of all, the EU is unfortunately a talking shop in many respects. It is not a homogeneous nation like USA. It consists of many disparate nations with many different views. Italy and Spain wanted to tone down the name of the program. Hungary doesn't like the program at all, and so on. Rather, what is happening is that there's a green light to do some military spending, that's quite clear. This is in itself, at least would be a step forward, but it misses out the point that Europe is so far behind technologically, Russia and America, that in point of fact, it won't be very fast. They're talking about 2030, thinking that Russia will only attack by then, which according to my predictions is false. The point is that it will not be ready for some time in terms of hardware. Thirdly, there was a little comment then by the Germans about how small Russia is in terms of people compared to Europe. Unfortunately, history teaches quite the opposite. Genghis Khan took out the whole of the Chinese Empire, which was many, many times bigger than his entire nation. His military was much smaller than the Chinese. It simply doesn't follow in war that a smaller nation cannot defeat a bigger one. And fourthly, there is in here a problem. You see, it all depends how Russia views it. Please remember, the World War II is still very vivid in Russian thinking. If Germany were to rearm a great deal, they would see this as a threat. And here comes the other point. In my latest book, which I've gone to Poland, it's in Polish, I point out that the problem of World War III is that it's a nexus. You can go one way or the other, and it still ends up in World War III. So therefore, if Germany and the EU do not rearm, then they are a prize. If they do rearm too much, then they are a threat. And therefore, one way or the other, we still end up in the uncomfortable situation that World War III may well occur. This point doesn't seem to be addressed here, and therefore it is not entirely clear what we can do in this respect to avoid World War III. The good news is that Europe will certainly do some rearmament, and if it doesn't go too far, it will be a great help in dissuading Russia from attacking.
That's a fascinating analysis. I would go further and say it's a perversely fascinating analysis. But I mean, what is interesting here is that all of this, I mean, there's always the fear of Russia, but then the impetus that's giving immediacy to this is as a result of Donald Trump's second term in the White House, which has brought about a rapid change of outlook across Europe.
Yes, and this is exactly what Donald Trump wanted. And incidentally, other Americans too, they support this, that Europe should look after its own defense and spend more money because it's been getting a free ride on the back of the States now for decades, literally decades. There is another aspect to this, of course, is that they keep talking about the military. They haven't mentioned the elephant in the room, nuclear weapons. You see, according to my analysis, which I published before, the war, that if Russia were to have a war with Poland on that frontier, it would use nukes. It has no intention of using them in Ukraine because Ukrainians are seen by Russians as a type of Russian, as this recent decree signed by Putin, in fact, simply underlines. Not so the Poles. And therefore, in this respect, what is threatening here is a tactical nuclear war. So therefore, when we talk about the EU spending more money on tanks or stuff like that, it is in fact thinking 20th century terms for what may be a different type of war altogether. And for that, they are not preparing at all, as far as I can tell. That includes Poland, which is actually the country which I foresaw would be devastated were it unfortunately to find itself under attack by Russia.
Well, I would like to be reminded to put up some of those your books on the screen the next time we talk, because I think it's very important for people to be reminded of some of the things that you wrote about, which is what makes you a very interesting analyst. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, I want to thank you very much indeed. He is, of course, an international affairs analyst, and he was talking to me on the line there from London.